Sophie had been looking forward to this visit for weeks, packing her small suitcase carefully with the essentials she needed, though her mind was cluttered with thoughts she didn't fully understand. As she drove through the familiar streets toward her cousin Clara's house, memories of childhood summers, shared secrets, and laughter echoed in her mind, mixing with a strange sense of anticipation she couldn't quite name. And when she finally pulled up to the warm, brick house, a comforting feeling washed over her, a sense of home she had missed more than she realized, the soft glow of the porch light welcoming her like an old friend, and Clara appeared almost instantly, her smile wide and genuine, the kind of smile that made the world feel lighter. And Sophie felt a sudden rush of gratitude for having a family member who always made her feel safe, yet tonight there was an unfamiliar tension in the air, subtle but undeniable, a shift she couldn't put her finger on, and as she stepped inside, shaking off the slight chill of the evening air, the familiar smell of freshly baked bread and vanilla candles hit her, a scent that reminded her of countless family dinners and quiet nights spent laughing over silly stories, and Clara hugged her warmly, holding her for a moment longer than usual, and Sophie noticed the small crease of concern in her cousin's forehead, the kind that suggested Clara knew something Sophie didn't, or perhaps was worried about something that had nothing to do with her, and Sophie shrugged it off with a smile, telling herself it was probably nothing, though the thought lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind. And as she followed Clara through the hallway, taking in the familiar framed photographs of family events, vacations, and birthdays, Sophie felt a wave of nostalgia, a reminder of how life had changed for both of them over the years, the childhood simplicity replaced by adult responsibilities, and she wondered if Clara felt the same bittersweet ache for the past, a longing for the days when everything had seemed effortless. And when Clara led her upstairs to the guest room, Sophie noticed small details she had never seen before, the neat arrangement of books on the shelves, the soft pastel curtains fluttering slightly in the evening breeze, the cozy comforter folded at the foot of the bed, all seemingly ordinary but somehow imbued with a sense of care and love that made her heart swell. And as she placed her suitcase on the floor, she heard footsteps approaching from the hallway, and the sound made her pause, a small shiver running down her spine, not from fear but from a strange mix of curiosity and anticipation. And then Ethan appeared, Clara's son, taller now than she remembered, his hair slightly tousled, eyes catching the light in a way that made them seem almost luminous, and Sophie's breath hitched for a moment, caught off guard by how much he had changed, how much more grown up, the easy, boyish charm replaced by a quiet, intriguing presence, and Ethan's smile was polite, reserved, but there was a warmth in it, a subtle acknowledgement that something unspoken lingered between them, and Sophie felt her heart flutter in a way that made her cheeks warm, the familiarity of family intersecting with a sudden awareness of a different kind of connection she hadn't anticipated. And as she set down her bag, she realized she was studying him, noticing the tilt of his head, the calm confidence in the way he stood, and how naturally he carried himself, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if he noticed her noticing him, if the air between them was charged with an energy neither had expected. And then Clara's voice cut through softly, asking if they were hungry, breaking the spell, and Sophie nodded, trying to steady her racing heart, reminding herself that this was just a visit, an ordinary overnight stay, yet the electricity in the room suggested otherwise, subtle but undeniable, like the first hints of a storm on the horizon. And as they moved toward the kitchen, Sophie felt a curious awareness of every detail, the way the light bounced off the countertops, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the scent of herbs from the small indoor garden Clara kept near the window, and she noticed Ethan moving slightly closer than necessary, offering to help with setting the table, and Sophie felt a mixture of gratitude and something more complicated, a pull she couldn't fully define, a gentle tension that made her pulse quicken. And as they worked side by side, exchanging small talk about everyday things, work, errands, the weather, there was a subtle undercurrent in their conversation, a delicate dance of glances and smiles, hints of emotions neither wanted to name aloud, and Sophie caught herself laughing more freely than she had in weeks, drawn into the warmth of their interaction, the sense that this ordinary evening was becoming quietly extraordinary. And as they finished preparing dinner, the sun dipping below the horizon and painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Sophie stepped back for a moment to take it all in, the familiar comfort of the house, the sense of family, the unexpected closeness to Ethan that made her heart feel like it was teetering on the edge of something unknown. And she wondered if he felt it too, if his quiet attentiveness, the subtle way he mirrored her movements, the slight hesitations in his speech, were signs of the same unexpected feeling she could no longer ignore. And when Clara called them to the table, Sophie and Ethan exchanged a glance, almost imperceptible, a shared acknowledgement that this visit was different, though neither could say exactly why. And as they sat down to eat, Sophie's mind wandered, recalling memories of summers spent together, games in the backyard, stories shared late at night, and she realized how much had changed, yet how much remained the same. And in that realization was a strange comfort, a gentle hope that perhaps this night could be a bridge between what had been and what might be. And she felt a thrill at the possibility, a quiet excitement that made her stomach flutter, as though life itself had shifted slightly, nudging her toward a new chapter she hadn't anticipated. And Ethan's occasional glances, the faint smile that tugged at his lips when she spoke, added to the charged atmosphere, small gestures loaded with meaning, unspoken but deeply felt. And Sophie found herself drawn into the rhythm of the evening, laughing softly at Ethan's dry humor, feeling a warmth that went beyond family, a subtle, thrilling awareness that something delicate, fragile, and possibly transformative was forming between them. And yet, as dinner progressed, there was a tension she couldn't name, a question that hovered in the air, like the calm before a storm. And when they finally finished, Sophie excused herself to her room, trying to gather her thoughts, heart pounding, mind racing with emotions she had never expected to feel during a simple overnight visit. And as she unpacked her small bag, placing clothes neatly in the drawer and arranging her toiletries, she paused at the window, looking out at the evening sky, now dark and dotted with stars, and thought about the strange, magnetic pull she felt toward Ethan, the curiosity, the gentle thrill of attraction that was both confusing and exhilarating. And she knew that tonight, a simple visit had quietly shifted into something far more complicated, layered with emotion and possibility, a night that would linger in her memory longer than she could have imagined. And as she prepared for bed, she could still hear the soft footsteps outside her door, the quiet presence of Ethan in the house, and a flutter of anticipation ran through her, knowing that the ordinary could become extraordinary in the most unexpected ways. And in that moment, Sophie realized that an overnight stay had begun as routine but was now charged with unspoken tension, gentle longing, and the delicate promise of something new and unexpected, leaving her both excited and nervous for what the night and the next day might bring. The evening settled into a quiet rhythm as Sophie and Ethan moved from the kitchen to the living room, the soft hum of the heater blending with the distant sound of rain tapping against the windows, a steady, soothing rhythm that seemed to mirror the fluttering in Sophie's chest. And as they sat across from each other on the comfortable couches, each with a steaming cup of tea in hand, there was an almost tangible tension lingering between them, subtle yet undeniable, a delicate thread of curiosity, attraction, and something more complicated, a blend of familiarity and novelty that neither of them had expected to feel. And Sophie found herself observing Ethan closely, noticing the slight curve of his smile when he caught her eye, the way his hands wrapped around the warm mug as if grounding himself, the calm patience in his voice as he spoke about ordinary things, like the work he had been doing lately, the small projects at the office, the errands he had run earlier in the week, details that seemed mundane on the surface but felt significant to Sophie because of the intimacy of sharing. And she realized she was listening more intently than she had to anyone in a long time, her mind absorbing every word, every subtle inflection, every pause that carried unspoken meaning. And Ethan, for his part, seemed equally aware of her presence, the way she shifted slightly when he spoke, the quick but deliberate glances she cast his way, the gentle way her laughter floated across the room when he said something dryly humorous. And he felt a warmth spread in his chest, a quiet, surprising pull he couldn't fully explain, an attraction that felt both familiar because he had known Sophie as a child and entirely new because he was noticing her now as someone grown, someone vibrant and quietly compelling. And as the rain continued its steady patter, the conversation deepened, moving from work to more personal topics, stories about childhood memories, dreams for the future, little disappointments and quiet triumphs that shaped who they were. And Sophie found herself sharing things she rarely admitted aloud, the sort of small confessions that build trust and intimacy in unexpected ways. and she noticed that Ethan listened with genuine interest, not interrupting, not judging, simply absorbing her words, nodding thoughtfully, and occasionally adding his own reflections in a way that felt comforting, grounding, and unexpectedly intimate. And with each passing minute, the air between them thickened with the unspoken, a delicate tension that neither wanted to name but both felt acutely, a mixture of longing, curiosity, and gentle nervousness. And as the conversation shifted to more emotional topics, Sophie spoke about challenges she had faced in the past year, moments of loneliness, times when she had felt uncertain about herself, and Ethan responded with empathy, sharing small glimpses of his own struggles, the quiet disappointments that had shaped his growth, the moments when life had been heavier than expected, and in those exchanges, a bond began to form, one that felt deeper than simple cousinly affection, a connection layered with emotional resonance, subtle admiration, and the faint stirrings of something more complex, more compelling, and more intimate. And Sophie caught herself smiling at him often, sometimes for no reason other than the warmth she felt in his presence, the calm assurance that he seemed to radiate, and Ethan, in turn, found himself leaning in slightly when she spoke, catching her expressions, savoring the sound of her laughter, the gentle cadence of her voice, and the rare, fleeting moments when their eyes met and neither looked away immediately, holding the gaze just long enough to feel the spark without naming it aloud. And as the evening wore on, shadows grew longer across the room, the storm outside intensifying with occasional rumbles of thunder, yet inside, the atmosphere remained intimate, quiet, charged with emotion, a contrast that made the small room feel like a world unto itself. Suspended in time, and Sophie noticed how the soft light from the lamp cast a gentle glow on Ethan's face, highlighting the lines of maturity he had acquired over the years, the quiet strength in his posture, the subtle gentleness in his gestures, and she felt a flutter of warmth, a kind of nervous anticipation that made her stomach twist in a mix of excitement and uncertainty. And Ethan, noticing her gaze, felt his own pulse quicken, a mixture of attraction, admiration, and a touch of anxiety. Wondering if he was reading too much into small details, or if Sophie felt the same tension that he did, and the rain outside seemed to mirror the storm of emotions between them, rhythmic, insistent, unpredictable, a reminder that the night was alive with possibility. And as they continued to talk, the conversation meandered naturally, from the mundane to the meaningful, from jokes to confessions, and at one point, Sophie shared a small fear she had carried for years, a worry about being misunderstood, about not being seen for who she truly was, and Ethan reached across the space, just slightly, as if to bridge the invisible distance, his fingers brushing against hers accidentally or perhaps not, sending a shiver through both of them. And for a moment, they both froze, aware of the subtle intimacy of that contact, the unspoken acknowledgement that there was more beneath the surface than either wanted to admit. And as they pulled back slightly, their eyes met again, charged with unvoiced questions, fleeting smiles, and the silent curiosity of people discovering each other in ways neither expected. And Sophie found herself leaning back, pretending to sip her tea, while internally she was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, excitement, confusion, longing, and a tentative hope that this night could become something more than an ordinary visit, while Ethan, equally unsettled yet exhilarated, felt the same pull, the delicate tension of attraction tempered by the familiarity of family, by the unspoken rules they both understood. And as the clock ticked quietly in the background, they both realized that time had moved in strange ways, that hours had passed unnoticed, conversations flowing effortlessly yet laden with emotion. And neither wanted to break the spell, the quiet intimacy, the shared warmth of presence that made ordinary words feel significant, moments feel eternal, and the air feel electric. And then, just as Sophie began to laugh softly at a memory Ethan shared, the lights flickered briefly and went out, plunging the room into darkness, the storm outside seeming louder, more insistent, the tapping of rain against the windows filling the space with a soft, rhythmic intensity. And in the sudden darkness, both of them felt a jolt, a mix of surprise, nervousness, and thrill, as if the night itself had paused to witness their connection. And Sophie felt a flutter in her chest, her hand brushing slightly against Ethan's as they reached for their mugs. And he felt the spark just as acutely, a warmth spreading through him that left him momentarily breathless. And for a few moments, they were frozen in quiet tension, the room silent except for the rain, yet the air between them thick with unspoken words. possibilities, and a delicate sense of longing. And as the lights returned slowly, revealing Ethan's tentative smile and Sophie's flushed cheeks, the magic of the moment lingered, stronger because it was unacknowledged, a subtle promise of emotional closeness waiting to unfold, and they laughed nervously to release the tension, yet neither could ignore the change that had come over the room, the shift in their awareness of each other, the way a simple, ordinary evening had transformed into something charged with anticipation, intimacy, and the gentle stirrings of attraction. And as they moved slightly closer, talking quietly in the renewed light, their voices lowered instinctively, each word chosen with care, a tender dance of dialogue that left both of them aware of every glance, every gesture, every heartbeat, and Sophie realized she was captivated not just by Ethan's presence but by the emotional connection forming between them, the rare kind of bond that makes ordinary interactions feel profound, that turns a simple conversation into a memorable, transformative experience. While Ethan felt a deepening fascination, an irresistible pull toward her warmth, her openness, the gentle laughter that seemed to resonate in ways he hadn't expected, and the night stretched on, each moment weaving a tapestry of emotional intimacy, quiet longing, and tentative discovery, until finally, Sophie excused herself to her room, heart racing, mind spinning, aware that this ordinary overnight stay had quietly turned into something far more significant. Something that neither of them could fully articulate but both could feel intensely, a fragile, beautiful tension that promised that the rest of the night, and the days to come, might hold moments neither would ever forget. And as she lay in bed, listening to the rain and the distant hum of the house, Sophie thought of Ethan, of the sparks in his eyes, the warmth of his smile, the quiet intimacy that had grown between them, and she knew that this night, meant to be simple and familiar, had become a turning point. A night charged with emotion, attraction, and the subtle beginnings of something tender, meaningful, and unexpected. The night seemed to stretch endlessly as Sophie lay in her guest room, her thoughts swirling with every detail from the evening, the flicker of Ethan's smile, the gentle way he had listened to her, the warmth that had spread through her chest whenever their eyes met, and despite trying to focus on simple things like unpacking or checking her phone, she couldn't stop replaying their conversations. The shared laughter, the quiet intensity in his gaze, and the memory of their hands brushing during the power outage sent a small shiver down her spine, an electric thrill that she hadn't anticipated but couldn't deny. And when she finally gathered the courage to leave her room, the house was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock and the soft hum of the heater, the storm outside having softened into a gentle drizzle, and she descended the stairs slowly, her heart beating faster with each step, a mix of excitement and nervousness that made her palms tingle. And as she reached the living room, she found Ethan already there, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea, looking as calm and composed as ever. Yet there was something in his posture, a slight lean forward, a subtle tension in the line of his shoulders, that mirrored the restless energy in her own chest, and he looked up at her as she entered, a small, almost shy smile tugging at his lips, the kind that made her heart flutter. And she realized that the quiet moment they shared alone, away from the routine and expectations of the day, felt charged with a delicate electricity neither of them had named but both sensed deeply, and she sat down across from him, their knees almost brushing, and they exchanged a glance that lingered longer than usual, a silent acknowledgement that something unspoken was growing between them, something that made ordinary words seem inadequate, and they began to talk again. Initially about simple topics, the weather, small updates on family members, the books they had been reading, yet as the conversation flowed, it naturally shifted into more personal territories, the kind of topics people only touch on when they feel a fragile trust, and Sophie found herself opening up about her fears, moments of doubt, and dreams she hadn't shared with anyone in years, and Ethan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering soft encouragement, and every gesture, every attentive pause, made Sophie's chest tighten in a mix of admiration, longing, and quiet affection. And as Ethan spoke about his own life, sharing struggles and small triumphs, she noticed the subtle vulnerability in him, the rare glimpses of self-doubt that he usually kept hidden behind polite smiles, and that vulnerability drew her in, made her want to reach across the small space between them, to offer comfort, understanding, perhaps more than either had intended, and they laughed softly at shared memories from their childhood, Moments that had once seemed trivial but now felt infused with a bittersweet tenderness, a reminder of how much time had passed and how much had changed, yet how some connections remained quietly constant, and Sophie realized she had never noticed Ethan in this way before, had never recognized the depth of his presence, the warmth he radiated, the way he seemed to understand her without words, and Ethan, in turn, felt a growing awareness of Sophie, the subtle changes in her expressions, the way her laughter softened when she was relaxed, the thoughtful pauses when she spoke of things close to her heart, and a deep admiration began to stir, tinged with curiosity and an unspoken attraction, gentle yet undeniable, and the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm of emotions inside, the rain tapping lightly against the windows, the occasional distant rumble of thunder creating a rhythmic tension that wrapped around them, amplifying every glance, every gesture, every unspoken word. And as they continued to talk, the conversation grew quieter, slower, each word chosen with care, each pause pregnant with possibility, and Sophie felt a longing in her chest, a fragile ache that whispered of connection, intimacy, and something more, something undefined yet powerful enough to make her pulse quicken, and Ethan, noticing her quiet reflection, felt a similar pull, a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and a tentative desire to bridge the space between them. And when their hands brushed again as they reached for their mugs simultaneously, it was a brief contact, but enough to send a jolt through both of them, a spark that neither could ignore, and they pulled back slightly, pretending to adjust their position. Yet their eyes met again, and in that gaze was an unspoken conversation, a gentle acknowledgement of mutual fascination and perhaps even longing, and Sophie found herself laughing nervously, her voice a soft melody in the room, a release of the tension that had been building all evening, while Ethan smiled, a quiet warmth in his expression, both relieved and exhilarated by the intensity of the shared moment, and as they leaned back, sipping their tea, the room seemed to shrink, closing around them with a comforting intimacy. The walls, the furniture, even the flickering light from the lamp contributing to a sense of cocooned seclusion, a private world where time slowed and ordinary concerns melted away, and Sophie noticed the subtle ways Ethan's presence affected her, the ease with which her thoughts flowed when he was near, the gentle way she felt herself leaning into the warmth of his attention, and Ethan, equally captivated, felt the magnetic pull of her energy, her laughter, her quiet attentiveness, the way she hung on his every word yet offered her own insights softly, with a natural grace that made him want to linger in the moment indefinitely, and they shared stories of missed opportunities, unfulfilled dreams, moments of heartbreak, and small victories that went unnoticed by the world, and each revelation, each honest confession, wove a delicate thread between them, strengthening the emotional bond, making the ordinary room feel like the center of their own private universe, a place where vulnerability was safe, attraction could simmer, and intimacy was nurtured in quiet, tender ways, and as the hours passed, Sophie realized the world outside no longer mattered, the storm outside a distant hum, irrelevant compared to the storm inside her own heart, the way her pulse quickened at every glance from Ethan, the way her thoughts kept returning to him, wondering what he was feeling, whether he sensed the same magnetic tension she did, the same unspoken curiosity, the same tentative longing, and Ethan, noticing the subtle shifts in her expressions, the small touches of nervousness and excitement, felt a swelling awareness, a deep fascination with her presence, with the energy she carried, with the delicate balance of closeness and restraint between them, and neither dared to voice the feelings that had begun to surface, choosing instead to let them simmer, to explore them through soft glances, gentle smiles, and careful conversation, each moment stretching and layering with complexity, and Sophie found herself leaning slightly closer as she laughed at a memory Ethan recounted, the heat in her chest mingling with the nervous excitement of proximity, while Ethan mirrored her movement subtly, the faintest shift in posture conveying a shared desire, a mirrored interest, without breaking the boundaries of propriety, and the storm outside seemed to echo their inner tension, a soft, steady reminder of the power of emotion, of connection, of possibility, of the delicate magic of a night spent in the company of someone who made the heart race and the mind whirl with anticipation, and as they finished their tea, the quiet settling in, they both realized the night had passed faster than either expected, that hours had dissolved into moments, moments into memories, and the ordinary overnight visit had transformed into an extraordinary emotional encounter, charged with subtle longing, tender attraction, and unspoken understanding, and as Sophie rose to leave the living room, heart pounding, a gentle shiver running through her, she felt Ethan's gaze on her. Intense yet soft, full of questions and quiet fascination, and when their hands brushed again, intentional or not, it was enough to leave them both aware of the fragile thread connecting them, the invisible bond of curiosity, attraction, and something tender, something that could grow if nurtured, and as Sophie retreated to her room, she felt an ache in her chest, a mix of excitement and fear, realizing that what had begun as an ordinary stay had quietly transformed into a night of unspoken emotions, subtle longing, and the gentle beginnings of something deeply meaningful. And Ethan, watching her leave, felt the same pulse of anticipation, the same flutter of excitement and nervous curiosity, knowing that the ordinary night had become a turning point, a night of emotional revelation, of connection that neither could yet define, a night that promised the possibility of intimacy, understanding, and perhaps the delicate stirrings of love. And as the rain outside softened to a whisper, the room silent except for their own thoughts, both felt the lingering awareness that their lives had subtly shifted, that what started as a simple visit had opened the door to something unexpected, something powerful, something that would linger in memory long after the night had passed, leaving hearts racing, minds spinning, and a tender anticipation of what was to come. The night had settled into a quiet, almost reverent calm, yet inside Sophie, a storm of emotions raged, her mind replaying every interaction with Ethan from the evening, the way his eyes lingered on her a fraction longer than necessary, the way his laughter, soft and unassuming, seemed to resonate deep within her chest, stirring a mixture of nostalgia, curiosity, and something she hadn't anticipated but couldn't ignore. And as she stepped into the living room, drawn by the soft hum of the heater and the faint scent of tea that had cooled slightly, she found Ethan already there, his posture relaxed yet charged with an unspoken tension, a presence that seemed to fill the room with a quiet energy. And when their eyes met, Sophie felt a jolt, a sudden awareness that the ordinary evening had shifted, that every glance, every gesture, carried more weight than it should, and she felt a blush rise to her cheeks, which Ethan noticed with a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that made her pulse quicken, a gentle reminder that attraction could exist without words, without overt declarations, quietly, tenderly, like a slow burn. And as they settled into the familiar couches, cups of tea in hand, the conversation began cautiously, at first circling around neutral topics, updates on friends, work routines, favorite books, but quickly, almost naturally, it deepened, moving toward reflections, memories, and small confessions, the kind of exchange that allows two people to glimpse each other's inner worlds. And Sophie found herself revealing little pieces of herself, stories of past heartbreaks, moments of uncertainty, aspirations she had tucked away for fear of disappointment, while Ethan responded with equal candor, recounting quiet struggles and personal victories, moments of vulnerability that he rarely shared. And the intimacy of the exchange was palpable, a delicate, invisible thread weaving between them, connecting their hearts in ways neither fully understood yet both felt acutely. And as the rain continued its gentle drum against the windows, Sophie realized she had never experienced anything like this, the simultaneous comfort and thrill of someone listening with complete attention, offering empathy and quiet admiration in the same breath. And Ethan, noticing the subtle expressions that crossed her face, the soft curve of her smile, the fleeting glint of vulnerability in her eyes, the way her hands wrapped around the mug as if anchoring herself, felt an irresistible pull, a desire to be closer, to understand her more deeply, yet constrained by the awareness of propriety and the delicate nature of the unspoken. And as they laughed softly at shared childhood memories, moments that had seemed trivial at the time but now felt loaded with tenderness and nostalgia, Sophie caught herself leaning slightly forward, unconsciously drawn into the warmth of Ethan's presence. And Ethan mirrored her movement, a subtle, almost imperceptible alignment, a reflection of the growing emotional bond. And each passing moment intensified the unspoken tension, a gentle, simmering awareness that their connection had shifted from casual familiarity to something quietly profound, something that made the heart race without requiring words. And when their hands brushed as they reached for their tea mugs simultaneously, the contact was fleeting, yet it sent a ripple of awareness through both of them, a spark of electricity that neither could ignore, a silent acknowledgement that the ordinary had become extraordinary. And in that instant, Sophie felt a swirl of excitement, nervousness, and longing, a cocktail of emotions that left her both breathless and grounded, while Ethan felt a similar rush, a mixture of fascination, admiration, and tentative desire, a delicate curiosity that urged him to explore this new dimension of their relationship while respecting the fragile boundaries that existed. And as the conversation continued, the topics grew deeper, touching on fears, regrets, and hidden joys, each revelation an opportunity to connect, each admission a building block of trust, intimacy, and quiet emotional attraction. And Sophie found herself hanging on every word, noticing the way Ethan's voice softened when he spoke about personal matters, the way his eyes seemed to search hers for understanding, the gentle nods, the small, reassuring gestures that conveyed empathy and care without the need for explicit statements. And Ethan, equally captivated, felt the subtle pull of her energy, her warmth, her intelligence, and the vulnerability she shared so willingly. And with each passing moment, the room seemed smaller, the world outside fading, leaving only the shared space of two hearts discovering each other in ways that were tender, gentle, and deeply affecting. And as the storm outside softened to a drizzle, the quiet intimacy of the night became almost tangible. A cocoon in which every glance, every soft laugh, every subtle brush of fingers carried a weight of unspoken emotions, a dance of attraction and connection that neither had fully acknowledged but both felt intensely. And when Sophie spoke of small dreams she had long kept private, Ethan leaned in just slightly, listening with rapt attention, his gaze steady, warm, and patient, conveying support, admiration, and a quiet intrigue that left Sophie aware of every flutter of her heartbeat. And she realized that in this moment, in this room, she was seen in a way she rarely allowed herself to be, noticed not just for surface-level interactions but for the nuances of her character, her thoughts, and her emotions. And Ethan, feeling the same intensity of awareness, was equally drawn to her presence, the way she carried herself, the subtle expressions that revealed her inner world, and the soft, growing tension between them was like a current, gentle yet persistent, urging connection, closeness, and intimacy without crossing the boundaries of propriety. And as the night wore on, the room filled with shared confidences, laughter, and the comfortable silence that exists only between people truly attuned to each other. And Sophie noticed the delicate details, the way Ethan's brow furrowed slightly when he considered something deeply, the quiet strength in his posture, the faint warmth of his hand when it brushed against hers unintentionally, the way his smile shifted subtly when he caught her gaze, all of which made her pulse quicken. And Ethan, in turn, observed the way Sophie's eyes lit up when she spoke passionately, the curve of her lips when she laughed, the soft sighs that punctuated moments of introspection. And he felt a magnetic pull toward her, a desire to linger in the moment, to savor the emotional closeness, the quiet thrill of connection. And though neither spoke directly about it, the awareness of mutual attraction, curiosity, and longing hovered like a delicate mist around them, wrapping every word, every gesture, every glance in the possibility of something more. And when Sophie stood to stretch, her movements graceful yet hesitant, Ethan's gaze followed her, not with impropriety but with a quiet fascination, a gentle desire to understand her, to be near her, to share in this fragile, tender moment of unspoken emotions. And the brief contact of their hands as she adjusted a cushion, a simple accident or perhaps fate, sent a shiver through both of them, igniting a current of awareness, anticipation, and subtle longing. And as they laughed nervously, pretending to dismiss the feeling, neither could ignore the intensity of what was building, the delicate, electric energy of two hearts recognizing each other. And Sophie realized that what began as an ordinary visit had quietly transformed into a night of emotional exploration, tender attraction, and subtle intimacy, where words were secondary to glances, gestures, and the shared understanding of something quietly profound. And Ethan, feeling the same shift, marveled at how seamlessly their connection had deepened, how the ordinary had become extraordinary, and how a single evening could hold so much significance, shaping thoughts, feelings, and possibilities in ways that neither could have predicted. And as Sophie retreated to her room, heart fluttering and mind racing, Ethan watched her leave, the room suddenly feeling emptier, yet charged with the promise of continuation. And both understood, without saying it, that this night would linger in memory, a delicate, emotionally rich experience, the start of something tender, meaningful, and unexpected. And as the rain outside whispered softly against the windows, the house silent except for the rhythm of their hearts and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Both felt the profound realization that an ordinary overnight stay had quietly become a turning point, a night of unspoken emotions, subtle longing, and the fragile beginnings of a connection that could grow, if nurtured, into something truly extraordinary, leaving them both aware that what had happened in these hours was more than coincidence, more than chance, more than a casual encounter, but rather a delicate intertwining of hearts, a shared recognition of attraction, understanding, and tender curiosity, a soft promise that the ordinary could transform into the unforgettable, and that the night's unspoken emotions would echo in their minds, hearts, and interactions in the days to come, setting the stage for a story that was only beginning to unfold, a story of connection, longing, and the quiet, profound magic of being seen, understood, and noticed by someone who mattered in ways both tender and significant.